I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Join us in this special edition of our Collapse-Aware Parenting Project as we speak with Dr. Katie Wiens, a neuroscientist, and Brennan Smith, a leadership development consultant, as they share about their efforts at conscious parenting and co-regulation and community building in this, the most difficult time in human history.
All right. Well, I am again enchanted to be interviewing a couple of folks for this special side project for the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And that is the Take My Hand conscious parenting in times of collapse and predicament, or as I like to call it, in time and of stolen dreams. Had the pleasure of interacting a few times with a leadership development consultant named Brennan Smith in the deep adaptation community and elsewhere. And I guess at some point I mentioned about this project, having him talk about being a parent. And I'm so pleased that today we get a rare opportunity to have both parents in the same room at the same time. Unfortunately, that's rare in this series of interviews on parenting. And Dr. Katie Wiens is Brennan Smith's spouse, and she's a professor of neuroscience. And I just really appreciate the both of you setting up this time. I know your time is precious, and I can't imagine a more important conversation. And because we're speaking with people from all walks of life, I'm so interested in hearing what your particular slice of reality looks like in terms of, and from both of your perspectives individually, what are we facing in this world, and particularly, how do the circumstances that we're facing now, collectively, globally, how do they shift you individually and together as adults in this world and as parents? So to both Brennan and Dr. Katie Wiens, thank you both for coming, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I would say take your pick in terms of who would like to begin with any of those questions, or if you would like a more specific one narrowed down, I'm happy to narrow it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I certainly had thoughts as you were speaking. Did you want to say anything about that?
You can go ahead and go first.
Yeah.
Go from there.
So my particular worldview on all of this is that there were so many forks in the road on the human path from the dawn of consciousness on, and agriculture and all of those choices that we made in our civilization. And, it's no harm, it's no foul. We thought we were moving on a path that would work out for the prosperity of everyone. And sure, greed and avarice and war and all of these things played their role in some of the imbalancing of it. And yet there was this overarching desire to do right by one's neighbor and to take care of one's family. And we did our best. And we're quite clear now that these systems have no inherent evil, yet they simply don't work for the web of life and therefore for us. And so it's my worldview that collapse is both inevitable and necessary as a reset button that forces the release of our own hubris in the matter and the way we've chosen to relate to nature, and that gives us an opportunity to be the generators of a new conversation. That said, it is also my view, which is the reason you and I got so deeply in touch, is because I really value your work in this regard, Dean, and I'm up to doing this work in my own local community as well. I don't believe we can be the speakers of that new narrative as long as we're living in a fearful relationship to collapse, or a resistant one, or anger about what is. And so this internal emotional work as our very first line of action to come to acceptance with everything that we're feeling,
mm-hmm.
and to be grateful for all the abundance and beauty that we've been given all of our lives, and grieve the letting go of it. And that after traveling that period of time, then we can really speak to what's possible in a way that isn't clinging to or coming in a resistance to the loss of what was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that conversation enters my daily life at every single interaction. It is the primary lens through which I'm looking at the world right now. And I know you have successfully left behind being a trainer and a consultant. I find myself walking that line of supporting the family financially, and how can I navigate letting go of business as usual in an artful way that doesn't leave my family in the lurch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, building community here locally through offering these grieving circles and these climate leadership circles that I do is my entry point into a new conversation for myself and my skills and community forming that I'm hoping can be the very seedling of an associative economy, or a neighborly economy of shared gifting, because we met under the direness of these circumstances and we bonded through this emotional processing we're doing together.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to our children's school community and your work community, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there are multiple communities that could end up being the ones that we are interdependently leaning upon. But I believe that to be the economy of our future. And so I'm heavily invested in those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the sum total of where I'm at navigating all this.
Mm-hmm. And for me, like, most of this is, I didn't seek this information out, right? But Brennan was interested in it. And so he brought it to me, and I'm like, well, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I think in terms of raising our children, what Brennan was talking about developing that community, right? Those are our biggest steps that we've done so far, is because it's that community that we build in this area that, you know, we do have an advantage because it's not a super populous area that we're in, right? But if we build that smaller community, like, that's the smaller community that's going to help support our children, even if we would, you know, unfortunately not be here anymore, right? But now you've developed that community, and that community is the center from where they will go forward during collapse.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the
that's the external resilience, at least.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of approaches that, you know, we can certainly talk about in terms of how are we having them relate to their own emotions? How do we communicate with them in such a way to support their internal resilience?
Yeah, resilience is the main theme.
It's the lens through which I would put most of that. Yeah,
everything that we do, and even from a neuroscience standpoint, everything that we do in helping develop their creativity for how they're going to solve problems in a completely different world eventually. Like, those are the things that we are focused on in training our children in order to be able to do once they're needed.
especially since they are 7 and 3.5. So we're not exactly going to say, oh, by the way, kids, we've born you into a world that is dying.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
we screwed it up, and we're not there yet. We're gonna have that legit conversation with them at some point. But for now, building the substrate, the foundation that they can stand on and face it with us as a family unit, or if they choose to go out and join a different community and bond there, that they'll have a fundamental set of internal navigation skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was an extraordinary layout from both of you of what you're up to. And I've got to say, in all these conversations, not just the parenting project conversations, but also the many conversations that I have in the Poetry of Predicament podcast, I can count on one hand with fingers left over the number of people that have spoken with any kind of heft, any kind of gravitas about the importance of self-regulation, which is really the way I translate what you were saying about resilience skills.
Mm-hmm.
Building the ability to not only self-regulate or be able to return oneself from a dysregulated state to something familiar, at least, if not possibly even empowered, as transformational resilience would be defined. So I'm really impressed by that's where you're going and your articulation of it. And I'm curious, something, I guess what I'm hearing is how the two of you have looked out into the world and assessed what's likely to be happening and or what's happening now, and seeing some impact on your own systems, really seeing this is a big deal. And you're building that into not only your life strategy individually and together, but also into how you're raising your children. So this is unusual in this kind of interview. I've been asking people toward the end of the interview, with the last few minutes, do you do anything to self-regulate? And I usually have to define what self-regulation is. And they might have a little thing or two, we take walks around the block together, or, simple strategies. And I mean no disrespect to those brief answers, but it's rare to have folks who have given it this much thought and have put it into action already. Can you say a little bit more specifically, like from each of you, when you look out into the world, what are the larger concerns that you see, that you have, that you carry in your heart, that you then, when you look at your own children, think, these are the things that we need to be preparing for? Would each of you just share a little bit about what you see out there and what weighs heavy on you?
Yeah, I think I like the biggest thing, and it might make me cry, but so our 3.5-year-old has Down syndrome. And currently he gets what he needs, and he has the services that are necessary. And I have to say, like, people are amazing. Like Dylan is amazing, and everybody loves him. But if you get into a society where there's a lack of resources, who are the individuals that are going to be prioritized, right? And so having a child with special needs, I think gives us, or at least gives me, a different perspective on, if things go really bad really quickly, how is he going to survive, right? And that's why for us, the steps to make are to develop the community of people who care about our child. So that's a big one for me. That's one of my main concerns is when everything goes under, and then there aren't the resources for everybody, then what's going to happen to the people who are less able to get those resources eventually? Like, that's like the bad.
That's absolutely number one. And since that's been spoken already, I'll just say that on the logistical side of that, for me, it's about food security.
Mm-hmm.
It's about access to water, and just a shelter that can operate in the absence of external supports and grids and gas, propane, all of it. And we're in a really interesting time because Katie's work has just brought us to a new part of the country. We're only 3 months here in this new place. So all of this community building that we've been discussing is with brand new people. Mm-hmm. And the school community for our children is new. And we're sitting in a place right now that is a friend's house where during the academic year, they live in Long Island. And so they said, oh, well, while you're looking for your house, just come stay at ours. So we're in a completely like untethered, it feels like not our house kind of house, Mm-hmm. Which, what a gift. I mean, what an amazing, we're so grateful. And yet, as we look outward toward making a home for ourselves here, it's like, okay, well, are we going to get one of these houses that was built in the 1920s and is just desperately inefficient, and then have to what do they call it, retrofit mm-hmm. Energy efficient systems into it somehow? Or do we get land and build something, but then that doesn't make good use of all the energy that got put into building the existing housing stock, and so we've just wasted that energy technically, and now we're using up more land for human. It's like there are no winning answers, and the answers that could potentially rise to the top the quickest is yes, get that land, yes, build that zero footprint, and yes, make sure that land is soil appropriate for food generation, and that it's in an area where you can dig a well. And sure, that means the four of us are as secure as one could possibly be. Mm-hmm. But we are privileged, Caucasian, American, like that's not a solution that you can cut and paste, So how can we learn enough to participate in a solution that's actually mimicable and accessible, given that we see collapse as being a deeply uneven and mm-hmm. unjust occurrence that is happening already, but that's about to get much worse, especially for those who did the least to cause it. And so there are just a lot of vectors to be navigated, and no simple answers for sure. Given that this is a seller's market, and that this area, for the richness of its soil and for the beauty of its surroundings, is a desirable area. Mm-hmm. We just came here for Katie's work. I didn't actually think I ever wanted to live in this part of the country. It wasn't desirable to me, but getting here, it's very desirable. I love it, actually. Uh-huh. We're in the New England area of the United States, and I'm seeing now, like, oh, there's a reason why values are so high here, and why it's going to cost so much if we do want to do the land plus build or whatever, which I don't even know if we could afford. Every time I try to price it out in a zero footprint way, they're like, no, we don't do that. Like, we can't price that for you like we could a custom traditional whatever. So there's a huge learning curve. But yeah, sorry, your original question was about the heavy concerns. Mm-hmm. The heavy concerns at a right in front of our faces level are, how is Dylan going to have care if generosity and abundance is no longer the spirit of the community, but if there's collapse internally in their hearts as well, and they say, I'm sorry, I've got to look out for me and mine. And how can we prevent that? By the way we construct our community narrative with one another about how we can do this so much better if we're arm in arm, and if we walk into this co-creatively. And then food and water and shelter that is green shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. I've got to say, it's really impressive what the two of you have put together, patchworked together in a new community, new to you, and very, very inspiring. And it also reminds me that there are a couple of people on this now 8-person production team, if I can call it that, for this parenting interview project. And so I'll make a point of putting out some feelers to connect you up with these other folks that
Thank you.
have very similar priorities in place. And so that's some of the good news. The other side of that last question is, what are you noticing in the world around you and within yourselves that keeps your hearts open, that keeps you inspired, that keeps you getting out of bed every morning and looking into a positive frame for this daunting future? What keeps you both individually and collectively inspired?
That's a great question, and a really important one, because, you know, there's always could get really bad, right? And so we have to get ready for that and prepare for it. But it's always important to find the hope in something, to really look to see, because that's part of humanity as well, as how if we can all come together and we can all help each other through this. And there might be some bad things, but there could be some really, really good things as well. And so for me, I'm an optimist. I am really interested to see the potential ideas, especially like with our children, right? Keeping them creative, keeping them thinking about the possibilities. Mm-hmm. Even though things have taken a turn, what are the things that we could potentially think of in order to improve the situation? Mm-hmm. Right. So all of the creative things that could come out of this, I think that kind of gets me excited a little bit, to be able to find the problems and to find potential solutions to them. And with raising our children, keeping them positive enough about it so that they don't just give up. Right. So for me, it's the interest to see the creativity of humanity and what we could potentially do in the future. Necessity
being the mother of invention.
Yeah, right.
We're about to have a mother load of invention.
Yeah, you are most creative within constraints.
Yeah.
Right.
These are constraints of the highest order.
Yeah.
And
so
I do love that, as much as, you know, we can bag on people who believe in exponential technology as the savior that's going to pull us out of all this or something. What I do love about tech is its praise of data, and it's just it's worshiping at the feet of data that it has done, such that they have cultivated the skill of aggregating data in a way that has never been done before. Mm-hmm. Bring in all the living systems theorists now, who look at systems-wide interactive methodologies for understanding how it's all fitting together in the age of big data, you've got a really robust set of principles and understandings about how we could create the post-collapse society for ongoing regenerative living systems to be present, regardless of temperature change. And we may not be present for those if the temperature gets too high. But if we can keep that temperature within the threshold of human existence, we can be the shepherds and protectors, to use the divine feminine of nurturing and the divine masculine of shielder and protector, which I love when people bring those two together when they're discussing how do you stand for the climate without going into full angry warrior and without going into just, oh, it's all hippie happy, right? But that shepherd or nurturer and protector are sort of great models for us as we relate to ourselves as part of the web of life. That with these living systems models and the data that they have pooled, we can be sort of given the operating instructions to say, as best as we know how, go do this. And we believe that this will create a soil that is carbon reducing and plants that are self-regenerating in interdependence with one another through, forest gardening or through permaculture design, and all of these principles that are coming together that honor living systems. And so is there any way from where we stand now to predict whether or not that's going to be enough? I don't believe the data is there for that. Mm-hmm. What I do love is that the data exists that says we have a really strong idea about how to do this well, and how to even make usable soils in the middle of a desert that's never seen life before. And all of these things that they're generating now as living models based on what we've learned. Mm-hmm. And that part excites me. And again, I just want to reiterate it because I so firmly believe in it. I don't spend a lot of my time yet reaching for hope or for solutions, because I notice in myself I'm still doing the clinging to the status quo. I am very personally attached to life as I know it, and my comforts and my air conditioning and my heating and my whatever. And I notice about myself that these waves of grief are still getting stronger. They are not yet having peaked and waning. And therefore, I'm giving myself the space and time to be with my emotions, knowing, yes, we're on a limited time budget, but any solutions that I were to come up with right now would not probably be rooted in true possibility. They would be clinging and rooted in fear. So I'm trying to navigate that even as we do the things that are certainly ours to do now, which is that community building that we've discussed and our own personal self-regulation practices.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add on to that, and this may, I don't know if it'll make people mad or not, but sometimes it happens. Oh, yeah. I would actually be really excited to not have so much media exposure in our society. Like if there is a complete media collapse where our internet and all of our systems just go down because it doesn't work anymore, I would be completely fine with that. And that our, because in that sense, along with the building the community, right, you get rid of all your cell phones and you get rid of your computers and you get rid of your TV. Where do you go for your entertainment, right? And it's your community. And then within that,
and where do you go for your information?
Yeah, within your community, like to people that you trust. And that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to do this kind of stuff, but we would talk to people who are around us, and we would have bonfires and sing around them and make more deeper connections with the people who are near us.
Imagine that.
Yeah, right? Hey, crazy.
Well, you both just went exactly in the direction I was hoping we could go next, which is I've got to just name my own. I'm not proud of this reaction that I'm about to tell you about, Brennan, that I had when you were talking about the appreciation for the tech possibilities and so on. I have yet to be really encouraged in any significant way by anything in the tech response world. So I was cringing a bit, but I sure, as always, when you lay out your perspective, I learn a tremendous amount. And I believe I was given the opportunity to soften a bit in my resignation there. So thank you for that. And you ended up in exactly the place that that seems like the strong suit for this particular conversation. And again, this is just out of character, a big contrast to most of the conversations that I'm in. You both are so far out ahead of most of us in considering what is there for us to do, or as Darja Mail and Barbara Cecil have been putting out in their missives, how then shall we live? Mm-hmm. And particularly in all of the conversations I've had in these past 7 years in this impossible conversation, which is the name of my book from a couple of years ago on this topic, one of the stubborn cornerstones of our culture is that it seems like we have abundant communication and connection of one particular type in our world, and yet we have a membrane of resistance that's quite thick and again stubborn to having us connect about that which truly matters to us. And every time either of you speaks about particularly the community aspect of how to co-regulate on the community level, mm-hmm. how to be co-resilient at the community level, there's this kind of rush of acknowledgement and resonance. Every time either of you brings this up, I'm so excited to see where you've both taken this. And I'm so stunned that, again, this is a new community to you where you don't really have roots yet. And so it's extraordinary. And I'm wondering if I could ask you to just speak a little bit more about really at the core, that notion of that this is a time to find our people, is my kind of jargon for it. Mm-hmm. And that can mean online for as long as you said, mm-hmm. as long as online works. And obviously it's most important at the literally who lives down the street level. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you both could share about how might that show up at just the daily living level of connecting with people around you in healthy, for the kids, age appropriate ways, community, all ages appropriate levels. How does that connecting up with your own people, your own tribe, your own neighborhood, how does that show up for you as you look out ahead, as you imagine out ahead and it going well?
Yeah, that has taken a different feel from the different places we've been, like just in terms of our own path, right? So I went to grad school for 5 years and created a community there. And then I had to leave to then go and do a postdoc for 5 years and then create a community there and then leave that community to then go, then I had a faculty position previously, and I was there for 8 years. So we built that community there. And then now we just recently left that community, and now are here. And within the last 3 months, I feel like it has happened really quickly, that we've generated such a community of people who value and have the same commitments as we do. So it's been, I don't know if it's just the area that we're in, that we just agree with the people who are here. Or if it's just that we've done it so many times that we kind of know how to do it and just start talking to people. And when you feel those connections with people, because there are a lot of people here who I meet and I'm like, instantly, these are people that I want to hang out with and want to like develop our future with. And I think in terms of making that happen, we haven't done it yet, but like because we don't have a space to do it. But, you know, one of our plans was to just create a space that people meet.
It's an open door,
no RSVP, bring some food if you want. If not, no big deal, but let's all just be together in a space. Now, admittedly, we haven't done that yet since we've only been here for 3 months, but that's one of the plans.
It's one of the lenses at which we look at every house. And
yeah, like, is
every
this
possibility
going to be good?
Is that going to foster that gathering space that we want to be the source of?
Yeah, so just kind of creating this space, and if people want to come, and if nobody shows up one day, no big deal, right? Just, that's fine. You'll still have it a couple weeks from now, and then more people might show up. So it's just a space for people to gravitate to, who, you know, they don't necessarily have to have the same ideas as us, but it's just people who want to make those connections and providing the space for for them to be able to do that. And since we haven't gotten to that yet, but that's the future. But one thing I have noticed here, like when the house that we're living in, I literally met the woman who, like, we were going to move in August.
Right.
And I went to a education conference in San Francisco in July, a month before we moved out here. And I was didn't know anybody, like nobody knew anybody. So I said, oh, I'll go sit with somebody. So I chose this woman. I said, hey, I like your shirt. Can I sit with you? And she's like, yeah, sure. And we start talking, and within 20 minutes, I tell her my story, and she says, oh, I have this house. Why don't you come live there? Like, wow, when does that happen? So it's just like talking, like making those random connections of, you seem like a person who I want to connect with, and just making that connection, and people will offer you to live somewhere. Like, it just happens. But I wanted to finish on that one, because when we got here, one thing that I noticed is just something that my family has always done, and I just do it as well, and you and your family do it too. It's just providing help for people when they need it, you know? So like our new friends helped us by providing a place, but while we were staying here, I just looked, okay, what can I, help them with now? Like, it's this reciprocal helping each other when in time of need, or just, hey, can I let the dogs out for you? I noticed you're not here. Just kind of like little things like that I think help solidify those connections that you might have made a little bit, right? Just noticing when others maybe need a little bit of help. So that's a really good community building thing that I've noticed within these last 3 months. So,
Thank you.
Brennan.
It doesn't necessarily support anyone else who's listening or watching this, but I will say that story about meeting somebody who just happens to have a house where you're moving and says, come live with us, is Katie's life. And that's like, it is
disclaimer.
amazing. But the part that is actionable and that you don't need
Your
to have.
results may vary.
Yes, exactly. No guarantee of similar results. But the part that's actionable and that anybody can do is the part where we stand in our truth and we generate conversations about what's real for us.
Mm-hmm.
What was real for her was, hey, what's going on? Oh, yeah, I do this. And and I'm a little nervous because I just took this new job at a new university and I'm moving to such and such, and oh, I have a house there. But since we got here, and I understand if people would have an assessment about, oh, but I don't know if I have the courage because I live in a community that doesn't want to hear about collapse or whatever. I get that. And there's something that just is in the resilience aspect that we're talking about and leaning toward, where you take a deep breath anyway and say, I don't know what other people think, but for myself, I'm really worried about the direction things are going in terms of how the climate is putting pressure on these systems that we've built for food and for water and for energy. And I have concerns that those systems might not hold up under the pressure. And I have always been quick, as just a matter of who I am as a pacifist and as somebody who approaches collapse the way I do. I've always added in, and I don't mean like bunkers and walls and stockpiling weapons, but I do mean preparing to build a community that can share food and share water and help each other with shelter and needs and tools, and that we can all work together if things do get uncomfortable. And the part that I'm pointing out as like what I believe to be the magic of that is that I spoke the whole thing as though it's just my opinion. It's my worldview. This is my truth. And I don't claim it as the truth. And can we all elevate ourselves to that level of conversation when we're building community to find, as you said it, Dean, our people? Mm-hmm. Because you might have to kiss a lot of frogs, right? When we were living in Virginia, which is where we were prior to this, the largest naval base in the world was 20 minutes one direction. The Air Force base that ran all the Mercury missions for NASA when NASA used to be headquartered there was 11 minutes from our house. And a large Army base was another 15 minutes a different direction.
And shipbuilding.
Oh, and the largest naval shipbuilding facility in the country. Submarines and aircraft carriers and things. So to say, A, that it was transient, B, that it was conservative, and C, that it was pro-defense, pro-military is an understatement, right?
Yeah.
And so you can bet I had to kiss a lot more frogs there as I was speaking this holy bejesus moment that I had when I first read Jem Bendel's paper on deep adaptation, which was my collapse-aware moment in February of 2019, this year. All of a sudden, it just finally got to me that I could no longer hold as separate my concerns for coral health and ocean acidification and overfishing over here and food production in Europe and the UK being so heavily down by weather weirding and the Arctic ice melting and the rainforest degradation under Bolsonaro and all of these concerns that I had not had the courage yet to put into one integrated system and say, oh, good God, there's a runaway feedback loop and a whole set of systems here that are counterproductive against one another. And finally just get honest with what I believe now to be the inevitable and the predicament, as you call it. And so, again, having the courage to take a deep breath and speak it as only my truth has been a real entry point here. And I've had conversations with people who are, super earth-loving by appearances, and they have all the stickers on the back of their car. And I mean, I just thought, here's the most fertile soil I could ever have this conversation with. And I mentioned that I had been to an Extinction Rebellion meeting for the first time just to see what that looked like, because I wasn't sure if it was for me because they're so disruptive, you know, and I'm a bit of a rule follower. And she said, I'm unfamiliar. What's Extinction Rebellion? You know, and I was like, what? You haven't even heard of them, right? And then I said, oh, well, you know, collapse. And I just sort of gave the brief version of what they're fighting against. And she goes, what do you mean by collapse? What? You know? And all of a sudden I realized, like, oh, this isn't my people. I'm just gonna share my truth now, and just, you know, love her for her artistry. She's an artist, and for everything else that she brings that I already thought was like great about this mom at the school, you know. But like, oh, you're not going to immediately link arms with me and say, you're right, we really need to be there with each other, right? Whereas so many of the other moms and dads at the school and in the local environmentalist community who are just already like, well, they're leaps and bounds ahead of me in terms of their awareness. You know, there's amazing people around here who are in the national leadership conversations of some of these organizations, which is beautiful. But that is community building to me. It exists in the conversation, and it exists in my willingness to peacefully and from my own point of view express my truth and then let them respond. And then I'll know, you know, how immediately they will be a member of my people, or maybe they're going to come later and go, yeah, that thing you were talking about, I just got really hip to that and I'm dying over here. Can you help? And we'll say, of course, you know, and participate in that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Katie, anything? Have you been sparked to say anything?
I think we covered that one. Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Well, I'm not a big fan of advice in these kind of conversations, because I think we could all three nod in the direction of nobody knows what the hell to do.
Yes.
And what's
nod vigorously in that direction.
I'm gonna ask for all of us to just step into that uncomfortable zone, and not so much as advice, but there is so much wisdom and so much beauty in the truth that you both are sharing. I don't at all feel that it has come across as advice, not for a moment. But there's a typical question that I put in about this point in one of these conversations, where I'm wondering, you know, gosh, how did you just say it, Brennan? If someone that you've reached out to was kind of a no before, but then they come back later and say, you know, that thing you were talking about, could we talk? I really get a sense that there is an ever-growing population of people, even in this very, very insulated and privileged USA. There's a growing population of people whose guts are churning a bit, that whether it's environmental or political or cultural or economic, there are any number of different telltales of collapse going on. And I think that the number of people that will be coming back to us collectively who've been putting out the feelers, and they're going to be asking, can we talk? Can you say a little bit more about that stuff you were mentioning? I'm wondering if in that light, if both of you would take a turn at how would you help someone bridge from not knowing a darn thing, but just knowing that their guts are churning, that something is not right, into some kind of possibility, some kind of reconnection with the web of life, with the deeper self, the others, earth, and soul that we've all so disconnected from. But people like yourselves who have been stitching back together some sort of reconnection. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about what you might recommend, what you might share, see if it resonates for them? I'm asking if you could help folks who are in that shape start to build their bridge into some kind of new possibility. And just to be clear, again, it doesn't need repeating, I guess, because most of the people who watch these podcasts know I'm not talking about a whole new possibility, as Charles Eisenstein likes to say, the new world that, or the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. I honor that phrase and Charles's lovely spiritual guidance for people. But I'm not at all trying to say, nor do I hear you saying about this is about hope and we're gonna, get through this and we'll then be able to have a new economy and a new world and everything will grow just like the old days.
Yeah, I mean, we're not the economic theorists who are capable of pulling off Eisenstein and Schmachtenberger and these massive theories of future civilizations. It's like, yeah, that's for Brewer and the others to talk about,
I'm with you.
We're living in the micro community of how do we pull this off, right?
Yeah, and I basically am all the way along. I don't think I've given you quite nearly, I've said it a bunch, but I haven't said it nearly enough that you both are bringing so much heart and so much sobriety in the same breath. That it's remarkably empowering and inspiring to me in hearing you lay it out with your very, very personal, generously shared personal concerns. How will your son be cared for if the dominoes were start to fall, the dominoes that we all rely on for everyday groceries and just life being supported. And so with all those, with the sobriety of seeing that as somewhat happening now and more happening soon, there is so much in both of your responses and your presence. I'm just wondering if you could each share a bit as if those folks are listening now, and you could help them start to form their own kind of bridge to that possibility.
Can I?
I'm gonna.
Are you hungry on it?
Yeah, so that you don't take mine.
What? You got a good one? You think I'm gonna take it?
I think you're gonna take it. I don't know. But I think for me, like I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, right? We were outside all the time. We were playing outside. We were, doing Kansas stuff for my life, right? Gardening and all those things. But there's another step to that, right? There's your basic kitchen garden that you can do. And then like, there's your food forest stuff. There's your, how do we harvest these things? There's your, how do you make a shelter if you're out in the cold? And I wasn't aware of all of those things. So, but there are people out there who have expertise in that. And I think one of the things that kind of, helped make me more comfortable is learning those skills in order to be able to be self-sufficient. And there are gatherings all over the United States and elsewhere where those individuals who are really good at that are teaching novices how to be able to do those things, right? So making friction fires, making debris huts, doing acorn flour and other types of natural harvesting things, like getting back to the roots. And they call them primitive skills gatherings. And I think we've been doing them for
5 years,
about 5 years now. And you learn a little bit when the first time you go, and then you learn a little bit more the next time you go. And then eventually you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, or this is something that isn't offered here. So maybe we'll teach a class on this other thing. So if you kind of tap into, again, the key word for me, community, of people who already have those skills, and then everybody sharing together. And they have the classes where the kids go and they do the stuff, right? They go on
clay harvesting
clay
at the
harvesting,
riverbank, and then they make vessels that are useful for eating out of, and
and it's really
very
fun.
sustainable, fun.
It's
and
fun for the
out
kids.
in
It's fun
nature
for
stuff.
us, but you're learning skills that could be useful for your own self-sufficiency. So that's mine. If you have concerns, if you go to these gatherings, those other people have those concerns too, because they're more in touch with nature. And so that's just one to just do really easily, that you can just get started, because you can't jump in and do everything all at once, right? You can't start your own permaculture farm in a minute, right? You have to build up, you have to find the expertise around you and make those connections with people who are already doing it. And those communities do exist.
Yeah.
That was mine. I didn't want you to take it, so I jumped in.
Oh, very good.
You can go now.
I was raised without nature connection, and did not want that for my children. And so I was very focused on the idea of getting out in nature, and it worked out perfectly that my brother told us about these gatherings. And as a great equalizer, these are folks, the hosts of these organizations really get it, that the skills matter more than any kind of profit model that they have for keeping their organization going. There are scholarships, there are ways that you can just go and serve food at breakfast time and your way is paid or whatever. So it's a wonderful equality and gifting that they do. And so it really is available to everybody within, probably a 5-hour drive of anybody in this country. I'm guessing you can find at least one annual, if not multiple annual gatherings like that. If we turned the camera 90 degrees, you would see our very first 2 racks of acorns drying. We have never tried this before, but all of a sudden there's these red oaks around here. We're like, oh, look at all these acorns. They're just going to go to waste. Like, let's give that a shot, So we're going to make acorn flour for the first time in our lives. Just to start to play, and walnuts, started harvesting walnuts because I've heard about what a great profile they have for healthy fats and proteins and all that, and what a great, just effortless food they are. Well,
yeah, disclaimer, we are tasters, we have the gene where you can...
Where cilantro tastes like soap and all that.
Walnuts, the black walnuts don't taste good.
Black walnuts do not. English walnuts are
those
still wonderful,
those are fine.
Just like you've had in your cookies and brownies for years.
Yeah.
So watch out for black walnuts if you're a taster. It's like toilet bowl cleaner on the finish, and it lingers for a while. Anyway, so yeah, and then because this is a parenting podcast specifically, I just want to say there are so many wonderful resources of podcasts and downloads and CDs, if you're still into CDs, that you can get of traditional storytelling that born into the story itself are you're learning about the movements throughout the seasons of animals, or you're understanding the cycle of plant renewal, but it's a story, and our kids love them. The one that we most highly recommend is a gentleman named Doug Elliott. I think it's DougElliott.com. And the 3 that are especially geared toward children are Groundhogology and Marmotabilia, which is one funny name of a CD. Another one is Doodlebugs.
Creasy Greens. Crawdads, Doodlebugs, and Creasy
Crawdads, Doodlebugs, and Creasy Greens. And then the third is Bullfrogs on My Mind.
What about Raccoon and Possum? That's the name of it, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm less a fan of that one.
Okay.
Do they like
that's
that one?
The
I think that's the one they say.
Yeah.
Oh, not that one.
I just remembered.
Anyway, our kids don't happen to like Raccoon and Possum as a set of stories.
But Doug is amazing.
He's a great storyteller, and he weaves in all this music that he plays with his band, and at the same time that they're just bopping down the road on the way to school, or especially if it's a road trip, my goodness, it can occupy their mind beautifully for an hour per CD. They are learning. Our son knows now about the movement of the sun as it relates to winter and summer, and as that relates to animal behavior, and as that relates to when mating and trapping and all those seasons are, through story. And what the Native American root traditions are that informed the early settlers regarding these animal movements and all that on the North American continent. It's a delightful way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a delightful way to learn, it has been just an incredible delight to learn and experience with you both. I'm going to ask of you, Brennan, if you would, you've mentioned a few things that I would be very appreciative if you could send me some links that I can include in the show notes for this interview, including the last ones with groundhogs and so on.
Yes.
We could, I'm glad to put those into those notes, and I myself am gonna listen to some of those stories. They just sound wonderful.
And one thing we should definitely include, and I'll link you to those as well, is if somebody were to approach me now and say, I'm just now hitting the wall of my own emotions around all this, what do I do? I would definitely refer them to these great networks and support groups led by professionals like yourself running Safe Circle and the Good Grief Network and the work that reconnects and all those facilitators, as well as through Deep Adaptation's website, the new domain underneath that umbrella that's launching in early 2020 called the Deep Adaptation Guidance site. Which will be just an entire group of practitioners of various ways, if you're more spiritual or if you're more practical or if you're wanting traditional psychotherapy, but all collapse-aware guides to support people when they're having that moment where the beginning of their journey is happening and they want to reach out for support. So certainly on the emotional level, that would be primary. And then we happen to speak about more practical things when we answer the questions. I wanted to be sure to include that. And I'll send you the links to the ones that I know about at least. Hopefully you've featured others before already.
Yeah. Well, once again, my warmest thanks to you both for taking the time to speak with us here. And I look forward to, I just really hope against hope, this is not our last opportunity to speak and share, and particularly with with Professor Wiens. I can't wait to dive into some of the conversations that we talked about just briefly before turning on the record button today. There's an element of the neuroscience that's currently being offered at the public level that I think has barely begun to be used in a useful way. And I would just so love to hear your perspective about that important topic as it relates to the building of community, the successful communication of that which matters most to each of us individually. There's got to be more art and science available to make that a more effective and potent conversation. So my thanks to both of you for sharing so generously, opening up your hearts and sharing about your own lives. And I just wish you well as you build out whatever the next chapter of community that you're going to be building. And whatever community that is, they are damn lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thanks for your work in the world, Dean. Really grateful.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, And sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.